This is SD Times Live. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and today's webinar is Managed or Connected Apps. Which deployment model is right for your SaaS application? Today's program is sponsored by the company Snowflake. And now, let's get to it.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We have a great session in store today. We're going to be diving into the different deployment models through which people are building applications, customer-facing applications on Snowflake. So you might have heard some buzz about managed apps or connected apps or separation of code and data. We're going to dive into all of that today, and you'll walk away with a better sense of how to build on Snowflake and when the different deployment models are best suited for your use cases. A couple housekeeping items before I dive in. First, this session is being recorded and you'll get a copy of it tomorrow. And second, we have a team standing by to answer questions throughout. So if you have any, feel free to drop them in the Q&A panel. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Brad, starting with you, would love to hear a little bit more about yourself and your role at Snowflake.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Brad Culberson. I am a data platform architect. I work out of the field CTO office in sales at Snowflake. My specialty area is in data applications. So most of my career has been with customer-facing data applications at massive scale. At Snowflake, I help customers build and architect solutions that are successful on Snowflake.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brad. And now you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So Matt Hill, I'm a data cloud principal on the sales strategy team at Snowflake, focused on our application workload. And been at Snowflake for close to 7 years now. So looking forward to speaking with everybody today.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Omar, would love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, Omar Singer. I've been with Snowflake for about 4 years. My background is in cybersecurity. I originally led Snowflake's security engineering organization. And for the last 2 years or so, I've been leading Snowflake's cybersecurity strategy, working with our customers and partners on a security data lake strategy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Excited for this session. So with that, I'll pass it to Matt to start guiding us through.
Great. So I always love to open up just to set the context that today we're going to be talking about companies that have built products on top of Snowflake and why you as a company should consider Snowflake as your application platform. This isn't something new for Snowflake. It's something that we've had clients leveraging for quite a few years. And what we want to do today is really kind of talk to you about the different approaches you can take to building your applications on Snowflake. And so when we think about that, why did the list of companies on the previous slide decide to come to Snowflake? We'll talk just very briefly about some of the technology benefits around the capability to accelerate time to market, as well as differentiate your product. But where we'll focus most of our time today is really around the business models and how you can think about leveraging Snowflake to both improve operational efficiency, but also to potentially unlock new revenue models that you may not have considered before. So I always like to really level set on what is Snowflake before we start telling you about all of the great technical details and different deployment models. So when you think about Snowflake, first and foremost, you should think of us as a data platform. And what do I mean by that? What is a data platform? When we think of a data platform, really what we're talking about is a single platform that allows companies to ingest and transform data. They can store all of that data. So think of a data lake or a data warehouse, whether it's the raw data, the transformed data, or the modeled curated data for analysis. As well as a platform where you can run data science workloads, machine learning, and AI models on top of. And then, of course, ultimately build applications and share data. So why is Snowflake a great platform for people that want to run these types of data workloads? Number one is we have this concept of a centralized storage layer, which is a single copy of data. So our customers can bring any volume of data they want into Snowflake, whether that's structured data, whether that's machine generated data that's semi-structured like event data, log data, IoT data, even all the way up to unstructured data. Now, the beauty of this is that in the Snowflake platform, you're only storing one copy of the data. And when you want to leverage that data, you look at our next layer, which is the cloud computing layer. And that cloud compute layer, what it allows you to do is spin up isolated compute instances to take action against the data within Snowflake. So I could have one compute cluster that is dedicated to loading and transforming data. I could have another compute cluster that is for my internal BI and analytics use cases. And then I could have a third compute cluster that's dedicated to client-facing reports where I have really stringent SLAs that I need to adhere to. The beauty with Snowflake is each of these different compute clusters is isolated, but they're all working against the same data at the same time with no performance contention. So it's a really great, efficient way for you to start scaling up and scaling out workloads while making sure everyone's seeing a consistent view of the data, but not stepping on each other's toes. Now, another cool thing is something that we call multi-cluster warehousing. And this is an extreme value to customers or partners of ours that are building applications on Snowflake. What a multi-cluster warehouse is our ability to automatically scale out to additional clusters to handle spikes in concurrency. So for example, you may have a medium compute cluster dedicated to client-facing reports, and you know that a medium cluster always meets the SLAs that you have established with your clients. But what happens when it's Monday morning or it's end of quarter, when all of a sudden we go from 100 concurrent queries and users coming into the system to 500 concurrent queries in the system at one time? Essentially what multi-cluster warehousing allows us to do is that as we see those additional queries coming in and we see that a queue may begin to build, we'll simply spin out additional medium clusters for you, distribute queries to the different clusters to remove any queue from building up, and make sure that we handle the SLAs for those spikes in concurrency, and then shut those additional compute clusters down when they're no longer needed so that we save you cost. So we can scale out to handle those spikes in concurrency, but then also scale that back down to make sure that we're controlling cost for the application workloads. The last piece in this is the cloud services layer, which is also extremely important because the cloud services layer is what gives us a software as a service delivery model, meaning you don't have to worry about the infrastructure management. You don't have to worry about the performance optimization of your system, things like indexing, sharding data, data distribution models. All of that is handled by the Snowflake services itself, so that your engineering teams can focus on building functionality for your clients and delivering value versus just keeping the lights on and managing that infrastructure that takes away time from innovation and development. So when we talk about Snowflake for applications, I want to put some context on where we fit into this conversation. So if you think about a traditional three-layer architecture for applications, you have your application itself in the UI. That's going to sit on top of an application in a web tier, which ultimately connects into a database tier, which is traditionally built on a transactional database. And what we have found is that as companies try to scale up the capability of these applications and scale out to handle the amount of data, this becomes extremely difficult because you're asking a transactional database to do something that it's not very good at. So instead of trying to run these analytic workloads and bring additional data sources into these transactional systems, what Snowflake promotes is moving this data from the transactional system into Snowflake for your analytics layer, and then connecting your applications to that analytics layer for the queries and the processes that are needed to run machine learning, those embedded dashboards for your applications and your users. And when you do this, you get consistent performance, again, back to our scale out capability, as well as our workload isolation. You get great cost savings because you're only paying for those resources when they're up and running versus having to over provision a system that's underutilized for the majority of the time that it's up and running. Also, again, we can load data in all the time because we've isolated ETL and ingestion clusters so that data is always fresh and available. And as lastly stated, this is delivered as a service, so you don't have to worry about all the time and effort to keep things up and running and running at peak performance. So this is all great and good. And, Snowflake's not the first company that's promoted this idea of combining a transactional system with an analytics system in order to provide a better user experience. But one of the things that is unique about Snowflake is how we're able to handle expanding customer requirements. And a lot of those requirements tend to come down to data accessibility. And the notion that today, companies don't want to have their data spread out in silos. Companies have focused a lot of time and effort recently on centralizing their first party data, but how do they look at second and third party data and make sure that they have a single source of truth for all of their sources? Additionally, when you start looking at trying to pull data in both internally, but even more, difficult is pulling data from external sources. It requires a lot of processes and infrastructure, which companies don't want to stand up. What they'd prefer is to have just live access to their SaaS data and the data that's provided from their data providers in one location where they now have control over where that data sits, which also allows them to simplify all of the different compliance and regulatory things that they need to adhere today in the expanding data world. So with that, I wanted to flip it over to Brad to talk about one of the primary deployment models we see our customers leveraging today.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm going to go through first the managed application development model. This is a model where the application provider, the organization that's actually building the application and providing it to their customers, is managing the end-to-end experience for the customers. So in this, they have complete control over all the customers' data. It's stored inside of the provider's accounts. The provider itself has control over all the technology choices. So the provider is choosing what cloud providers to use, how to deploy their application, what technologies to use to deploy that application. So they have immense control over this, and it allows them to control this experience and allow them to offer something that is a very seamless thing for customers to come in. They normally pay one thing, easily onboard and easily consume that application. Today, we're talking about that being powered by Snowflake. By being powered on Snowflake, it allows a lot of capabilities that have not been available using other platforms. The thing that I love most about Snowflake is its data sharing. And you can see in the diagram here, just because the provider itself is in control of the data and is hosting it inside of their infrastructure, it makes it very easy for these customers to have live access to all of the data that's in there. So there's no ETL jobs that are in place here. The customers do not have to build code to grab this. And they can do what Matt was talking about earlier, which is just live query the data that's sitting inside this infrastructure. And all that's powered through Snowflake data sharing. Other things to think about whenever you're choosing this type of application development model, by having all of the data stored inside of one account or whichever account you decide to store it in, it allows for ease of building several features that are cross customers. So if you think about when all the data is co-located, it makes it much, much simpler to build functionality that's using insights and information from other customers to add value to everybody inside of your products. So it unlocks a lot of capabilities there inside of this model. It also allows for choices in tenancy to allow for higher and higher volumes of customers. So with it being consolidated and being in control over the schema, the account, how you're deploying the compute, and how you're co-locating customers in schemas and compute, it allows you to scale out to hundreds, thousands of customers inside of a very simple deployed system. Next, Matt's going to go into some of the benefits.
Thanks, Brad. So when we talk about some of the business benefits of the managed app model, I think, first and foremost, there are a lot of buyers today within an organization that don't live in technology. So if I'm within the marketing team or a treasury team, for example, I may be just looking for a turnkey, fully managed solution, and the managed application deployment model certainly provides that. In terms of, again, as Brad mentioned, you have full control of the technology stack. So you're not dependent upon your client being deployed in a specific cloud or having a prerequisite to have specific technologies in place to leverage that solution. So your total addressable market is virtually every company that's out there that fits your particular need that you're trying to fill. Because you can combine users into a single compute environment, or at least combine some users to one environment, have shared resources, you do get economies of scale from the cloud and from sharing those compute resources, which can help drive down TCO. As Brad mentioned, I think a huge opportunity here is the opportunity to differentiate and monetize your solution with secure data sharing. So for example, when we talk about data sharing, what we mean on Snowflake is just allowing other Snowflake customers access to certain data within your account without physically copying or removing it. This is very secure, I promise you, and we'll work with your security teams to validate and vet the technology, but just know it's safer than the traditional modes of sharing data today. So one example of how to monetize this is if you have industry benchmark data or you have some type of anonymized data set that you want to sell outside of your existing customer base, you can list that on the Snowflake data marketplace, and Snowflake customers can come find those data sets, transact for those data sets, and then have those data sets appear in their account, which they might use to enrich the data that they currently have that they're using for analytics today. When there's a joint customer, which is very common in these SaaS application accounts, we can think about, again, how do we remove the ETL burden from our customers where they're going out and buying tools. They have data engineers that have to write scripts and customize processes to pull data and transform that data. They have to pay compute cycles to load and store that data into a data platform. All of this takes time, money, and effort. With Snowflake, you can simply turn on the data share, and now that end customer doesn't have to go through any of that process. They'll just have live access to their application data now in their Snowflake account that they can join with other internal data sources. Even when there's a company that is not a Snowflake customer, but they are using a SaaS application and they want to get more value out of that data, there's this option for a provider managed reader account. So a common use case here might be, I have pre-built dashboards in my application that my customers consume, but they're often asking me for custom reports. Instead of saying no to custom reports, we can share data to a reader account and allow that company to come in, log into that Snowflake reader account, write their own queries, connect their own BI tools, and come up with whatever analysis they want from the application data without you having to do extra work. And the beauty of this is you can monetize that additional capability. So I wanted to just share a brief example of a company, Simon Data, which runs a customer data platform solution. And we're not going to get deep into this diagram, but what you see here is their Snowflake account. So this is the Simon Data hosted Snowflake account. And what they do is they collect the data from multiple sources on behalf of their customers and allow their customers to pull this data into the Simon Snowflake account, where they then do a whole bunch of data mapping. Once that data mapping is done, now you get the beauty of audience segmentation and management. You can create customer journeys. You can do all the personalization and optimization on the campaigns you want, and ultimately push those campaigns out to the different activation platforms. Now, what's very unique about Simon Data and how they're leveraging data sharing is that we need to remember data sharing is bidirectional, meaning it can go either from the provider to the customer or vice versa. So in this sample, this is the Snowflake user account. So the company that is a customer of Simon Data, but also a customer of Snowflake, they already have a lot of this, say, Shopify Amplitude data on Snowflake. Instead of having Simon go out and have to connect to these different resources, the customer can simply share data from their Snowflake account to the Simon Data Snowflake account for the data mapping, and then have the rest of the application take advantage of that data. So it simplifies that ingestion process. In addition to that, when all of the campaigns are run, all of the data for the results of those campaigns are also shared back to the customer's Snowflake account, so they can analyze it with other data that they might have. So now let's pivot to the connected app model, and I'll turn it over to Brad to go into some more details here.
Thanks. So this is just an intro to what the connected app model is for customers. So as an application provider, this type of model allows the application provider to focus on the code and the application and the UI tier. They're building that entire user experience, but they're leveraging their customers' compute and their customers' Snowflake accounts for operating all the infrastructure. The big benefit to the customers of these type of providers is that the customer is in control of this data. So all of the data that's getting persisted on behalf of the customer of this application provider can be controlled by them. So if they decide to redact data, if they have some limitations around retention, they have complete control over their data end to end. So it's not stored in the application provider's account anymore. So that it's splitting the responsibility. The provider is responsible for the app. The customer is then responsible for the data and operation of the data. But this does allow customers to have a lot of controls that they wouldn't have in a traditional managed offering. They could do things like managing the compute and how much budgeting they're doing towards this application that normally wouldn't be available. This makes for a very, very simple tenancy model because all the customers' data lives inside of their accounts. So in this model, there's no cross-customer data sets. All the data is well isolated into the owning customers' accounts. It's much, much easier to get approvals from inside of organizations just because you're always in control of the data set. No matter what's happening, you always have the big capability to redact and revoke access at any point in time in the future. This also scales well to large numbers of customers. In this, there is a bit of a organizational complexity because you do have to coordinate. Providers have to coordinate with customers to get their credentials for their Snowflake account and then remotely manage things like, in this case, they're remotely managing schemas and they're collaborating together to drive the applications themselves. Go ahead, Matt, you can jump to the benefits.
Yeah, so there's some really tremendous benefits to the connected app model. And this is a model that we've really seen gain tremendous tremendous traction in the market, in various different areas. So one of the benefits here is that from a builder or an application provider perspective, you're shifting the infrastructure cost over to the end customer. So, from a margin perspective, you have the opportunity to move some of the low margin COGS of your solution directly into the customer. And that way you don't have to worry about, again, those kind of low margin areas. This also can be a huge accelerator to your sales teams. So if anyone on this call has been on in a sales role before, you know that we have to do a lot of due diligence and filling out of surveys and questionnaires for security teams because it's very worrisome to an organization to have a third party in control of their data. When you can avoid a lot of that concern and confusion because the end customer has control of their data in their account, in their four walls, it allows you to bypass a lot of the red tape that you traditionally have to get through. As Brad mentioned, it does give a lot more flexibility to the customer. They can choose their data retention periods, for example. They can choose when to scale up or scale down performance. This is not dependent upon the shared resource model of a managed app. So if they want to tune and tweak things, either for performance or cost, they've got the option to do that. And, a really big thing here is a natural co-sell alignment with Snowflake and, in general with vendor solutions. So in these models, because the end customer is paying for the Snowflake usage, those account teams are very motivated to work with these partners because it drives a lot of revenue into those Snowflake accounts. So there's a tremendous advantage from a co-sell and partnership motion. Real quick, another example is MESSAGEGEARS, which is also a customer data platform provider on Snowflake, but they've taken a different approach than Simon Data, which is they built their application to leverage their customer data environments. So in this case, you do see they support multiple different data platforms, not just Snowflake, where they've built all the processes that we talked about before, the segmentation, audience management, orchestration, analytics to run directly in the Snowflake account. That ultimately that application is controlled by the MESSAGEGEARS cloud. So all the logic in IP and the UI is controlled by MESSAGEGEARS, but ultimately it's using the customer's data platform as the compute and storage for these applications. So just again, same type of solution, same space, just a very different approach to how they go after this. Now, what's interesting about this is, MessageGears is developing a solution for 4 different backends in this example. And what we've started to see as a big trend within Snowflake is that when we have companies that decide to build applications on us, they're often not looking at, should I build connected or should I build managed? But it's more around, what customer requirements do I have for my various types of customers that are going to lead to them selecting either a managed or a connected solution provided by my company. So the beauty here with Snowflake is whether you're building for a connected application model or a managed model, you're building to one single backend, regardless of what cloud you're deploying in. So now I can support customers, for example, if I've built a connected application to Snowflake and maybe one cloud provider, but I've got customers in other clouds. Well, great. Now I'm not going to support them with a connected application. I can support them with a managed application. Or if your core business is really around a managed application, but now you're selling into a highly regulated industry where the customer has very strict requirements about ownership of data, well, maybe there's a chance to offer a connected application model to satisfy those customers with higher regulatory requirements around data. So we see these 2 models living together and ultimately being a choice that you can provide to your customers to make sure that you're selling them the solution that most well fits their needs. And to go into a little more detail of that, I wanted to bring in Omer to talk in depth about one of our customers that's doing just that.
Thanks, Matt. Now let's dive into this case study on Hunters. Hunters is a cybersecurity company. It was founded in 2018 and has raised since then over $100 million for their security operations center platform. So they're helping customers deal with the really hard challenges around detecting and responding to threats. And they've been able to differentiate themselves in a very crowded cybersecurity market because they have some really remarkable benefits that they're able to offer, having built the Hunters platform on Snowflake. They're able to offer customers unlimited data ingestion. Customers are used to picking and choosing which data sets they can bring in and have visibility on. Well, with Hunters, they don't need to do that anymore. They get unlimited data ingestion. The data that's collected is also automatically investigated. So we all know that security teams are overworked, they're stretched thin. Hunters is able to do is to bring in automation to do some of the investigations behind the scenes and support the security team in that way. And also connecting the dots across different signals to do dynamic prioritization. So using data and analytics to further optimize the security operations center, make it more successful in protecting the company. And customers are really loving this product, and we're seeing a lot of traction for them among Snowflake customers. To kind of look behind the scenes in terms of the architecture of Hunters, we can see that Hunters has the integrations for all of these different data sets. These are generally not data sets that are found in Snowflake for our customers. For the most part, the security data is across all these different security solutions, while Hunters has the integrations to bring the data in. The data is normalized and enriched and then persisted to Snowflake. Then they also do detection on that data, automatically investigate it, and support the customer querying into that data with an interface that they've built that is tailored to security investigations, so that the members of the Security Operations Center have a familiar interface that is built to support an effective kind of investigation or creating additional analytics, etc. And when I mentioned that the data is loaded into Snowflake, I kind of intentionally skipped over who Snowflake is it, right? Because you're hearing that there's the managed application model, there's a connected application model, and they're very much not mutually exclusive. Hunters actually supports both. Hunters has their own Snowflake for customers that maybe don't have their own Snowflake or that prefer for Hunters to own the data. Hunters can deliver all those benefits around unlimited ingest, very performant investigations, etc., with their Snowflake. But many customers are increasingly saying, hey, we want to own our security data, because we want to do some ad hoc analytics. We have threat hunters that want to be very creative and go at the data in their own way. And maybe we also want to use this data for various use cases. For example, we might want to have security metrics and reporting, self-service dashboards using the enterprise BI tool, and make that available to not just the security team, but make the reports on the security data available to the CIO, the CFO, the HR org, the IT org, right? There's a lot of stakeholders involved in protecting an organization. They should each have visibility into kind of what they need to work on, how they're doing over time, et cetera. And by owning the data in their own Snowflake, security teams enable those different use cases. So a lot of customers are choosing to use Hunters as a connected application. And it's also driving a lot of growth for Hunters, because Snowflake, like you've heard, it's kind of pay for what you use. It's a consumption-based model. Well, that goes from being a challenge for the application builder to being a benefit when they're able to drive consumption in the one of the 6,000 different Snowflake customers in their accounts. That really drives alignment with the Snowflake sales team, and we are seeing that happen. So on this next slide, and going to market in the data cloud, we have here just some examples of the very close collaboration between the Hunters sales and partnership organizations and the Snowflake sales and partnership organizations. Like, this is not just lip service. This is actually a very collaborative kind of motion where the Hunters and Snowflake teams know each other. We do enablement so that the Snowflake sellers are comfortable having the conversation. And if they identify an opportunity where a customer would be well served by the Hunters solution, they will actually reach out to their counterpart at Hunters and introduce them into that account, giving them an inside track and delivering net new opportunities that turn into customers that Hunters would not have had if they didn't support this connected application model. So in this way, we're really able to turbocharge growth for Hunters, and along the way, help Snowflake customers to secure their organizations in a more data-driven, successful manner. Really a win-win, and I think a shining example of an application provider that has implemented both the connected and managed deployment options. Matt, back over to you.
Well, thanks, Summer. So to wrap things up, we talked about why Snowflake is a great backend for data applications and for a data platform in general. And then we talked about the expanding customer requirements. And what I like about this picture is really just to kind of put everything that we just spoke about together in one nice picture to really express why our customers are looking to powered by application providers as one of their first choices when looking to bring in a new tool or solution set. And so if you just think about it at a very basic level, they have internal data sources that they're bringing into their own Snowflake account. But every company uses applications, right? So if they're using a connected application, great. As we just mentioned with Hunters, that application is actually loading all the data directly into their Snowflake account while also giving them some great analytics capabilities on that data as well. If they're using a managed application, as we mentioned with Simon, great. They're using that application. They're getting a lot of great insights, value, and workflows from it. But that data is also being shared back into their Snowflake account so that at the end of the day, they can now combine all of their different data sets, regardless of where that data is originated, for more holistic analytics and data science across the organization. So that, again, all of their data is consolidated and available and readily accessible in one spot within their Snowflake account with very little work to integrate that data. Finally, I want to mention that if you are considering building an application on Snowflake, or if you've built an application on Snowflake and are looking to more tightly partner and align with Snowflake, we do have a strategic partner program called Powered by Snowflake, specifically for companies who have built their products on top of our platform. What the Powered by program offers our partners is essentially one, design and build work from individuals like Brad that can help you really understand what are the best practices of building your application on Snowflake. So that might be around optimizing performance. It could be the dependency design patterns, a whole host of different things that we want to make sure that, one, you get your product to market quickly, but also that we're building something that's scalable and will meet cost and performance expectations. As Omer mentioned with Hunters, we want to grow that business together. So we have a whole solution set around the go-to-market strategy, from things like press releases, an application directory for people to discover powered by solutions, all the way out to potential co-sales, alignment, and joint sales motions that we can drive with our partners. And then lastly is really recognizing that if a product's built on top of Snowflake and there is any type of issue with Snowflake, the impact's greatly magnified, right? It's not just our partner that's experiencing an issue, but it's all of their downstream customers. So we've got additional support resources in the program to make sure that we have a systematic process to drive faster issue resolution for these scenarios. So I encourage everyone who's thinking about going down this route to go register for Powered by Snowflake today and engage with the team. We can help you, of course, figure out what's the right deployment model for you to get started with. And then, ultimately figure out how can we grow the business together. Brad, Omer, Emily, thank you so much for supporting this webinar today. And, we'll look to address any additional questions that have come up.
That's great. I'd like to thank all our speakers today for a great presentation on deploying SaaS applications. I'd certainly like to thank Snowflake for sponsoring today's webinar. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you for attending today. And we hope you learned a lot from today's session. So until next time, again, I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times. So long for now.